Hi and welcome back to our small holding. This is part 4 of our renovation series, and today we're going to be looking at the development of our growing space, so join me. Hi, my name's Fiona. I'm in my favourite place on the small holding, which is the chicken enclosure. But what you might know or might not know is this is also our orchard. So we have lots of different fruit trees here. And I'm starting here because this was the first area that we planted food related items. So far in this series you've seen the renovation of the cottage itself, preparing the land in readiness for growing, and also the development of our outbuildings for storage. What we're going to look at today is the development of that growing space so we could start growing our own food. So let's just have a quick recap on how we got here. This will be short because we covered it in detail in part 2 of the renovation series, Renovating the Land. I want to show you a little bit of it again because there was a lot of work went in before we could even start growing. There were lots of weeds. They were actually to shoulder height on Hugh, my lovely husband. We then had to dig up the entire field to put land drainage in because it was so wet. And once the grass had started to recover, we then needed to put in a new septic tank, which you can see at the bottom of the field in this picture. It's that giant onion bulb structure you can see. Once again, the diggers were out, and by the time we'd finished that, it was mud everywhere. But after a little while, we got the grass re-established and we had the blank, flat canvas that we needed to start growing. And this is the orchard where it all started. These were the first plants that we ever put in to grow our own food. We do have apples, pears, sweet chestnuts, and of course these wonderful cherries which are ripening up beautifully. We do keep the chickens in here, which means that if any of the fruit actually goes over and falls to the ground, the chickens scoop it all up. It's amazing, it works brilliantly. Let me show you how it all developed. To begin with, we put in just 8 trees, 2 sweet chestnut, 1 pear, 2 cherries, an eating and a cooking variety, and 3 apple trees, 1 cooking apple and 2 eating varieties. The tree you can see straight in front of you is an apple tree. 1 year later, that tree is significantly bigger and the blossom on it is glorious. Of course, blossom plus pollinators translate to wonderful fruit. And here you can see some of our apples. We also have cherries in abundance. And although there's a bit more to the management of the fruit, it's actually quite straightforward. Don't get me wrong, the fruit is wonderful from the trees, but for me the greatest joy is that blossom. It comes out at just the right time. The rest of the garden is only thinking about waking up and the fruit trees are in full bloom. 12 months later, we decided to put in 6 more trees, 2 more apples, 2 more cherries, but this time 2 gauges in addition. We plant in winter because the roots are dormant, so they do look a little bit like sticks in this picture. 12 months beyond that, we put in 4 more trees. Over time, we've added to our orchard and we've kept it in the chicken enclosure, and that's because it provides shade for the chickens on very, very hot days, which is quite important. Now, this is our newest breed of chicken, which are called Old English Pheasant Fowl, and this one particularly likes to be held in the air and get treats hand-fed to it, which I quite like too. This is one of our latest trees that we've planted. Now, it is 5 years old and it was grafted onto rootstock by my wonderful husband. And even though the apples on there are actually quite small at the moment, they will grow and swell to a good size eating apple. Now let's move on to our next area, which is the development of the vegetable plot. The vegetable plot is our main growing area, and this is how it looks today. But let's have a look at how it developed. This picture shows part of that blank canvas that you saw at the beginning of the video. At the top right hand corner though, there's an area which looks like it's dead. The rest of the field is green, but that area is a horrible brown colour, so let's take a closer look at it. What we've started to do here is peg out a number of beds. They're 25 foot long and 4 foot wide. The idea of 4 foot wide is that we can kneel at either side of the bed and never have to step on it, so weeding should be very, very easy. The area is brown because we've decided to weed killer the grass. We have in the past taken turf off and dug it in or taken it off, but we've always discovered that seed heads are in the soil and grass keeps reappearing. So this was a way of trying to make sure that that possibility didn't arise. Because the grass had been killed with weed killer, we left it a couple of weeks and then we were able to bring the rotavator out and turn the soil over. That puts the dead plant material from the dead grass back into the soil, hopefully enriching it a little bit. We decided to enrich it even more. We're lucky enough to have a farming neighbour who keeps both cattle and horses, and he's got lots of well-rotted manure that he's only too happy to get rid of. So he brought us 2 tractor trailer loads full and left them at the bottom of the field. With a lot of heavy shovel work and a very big barrow, we moved a lot of that muck over to each of the individual beds, spread it over the top, then we brought the rotavator back out and turned it into the soil. Once that had been done, we needed to get rakes out and rake it over to break up any hard lumps until the soil was like a fine tilth. This is only a foundation for our vegetable plot. Next thing to do was to build a raised bed arrangement, and we didn't want it to be very high, just enough to take another layer of manure at least. So we used decking board on its side, and this is what it looked like. We created deep pegs into the ground and screwed the decking boards into them. With the construction part complete, the extra manure is then added, rotavated in, raked over, and this is the final result. The depth of the bed is now significantly deeper than the level of the outside soil, but it's rich and so nutritious, great to start growing. As soon as we planted, we realised we needed some protection. We've got a lot of pigeons in this area, so things like cabbages would need netting over the top, and this was our first attempt at netting. Didn't work very well though. It kept falling off the spikes and getting ripped whenever a pigeon tried to land on top. The netting structure had to evolve, and this is what we came up with. It's a basic goalpost arrangement with a wooden structure down the middle. Over the top of that, we've draped plumbing pipe, which is simply pushed into the soil inside the raised bed. That arrangement then allows us to drape netting over the top. Once it's fitted, it makes a fantastic cage. The beauty of this structure is you can put any type of netting on. Here we've added bird netting, so birds are kept out, but pollinating insects can get in to pollinate the flowers to grow peas. Overall, we've used this arrangement on multiple beds, and the beauty is that the goalposts can be lifted up and moved to different beds wherever we need them. Then we could get on to the planting. We tend to plant in straight rows using pegs and string. Here we're marking out for parsnips. It's not so it looks neat, it's actually so we're less likely to be pulling out a parsnip than a weed. If we're weeding between the strings, we know that we're not pulling up parsnip. And just to show that once the plants are a lot bigger, it doesn't make any difference, this is the same bed a little later on. The parsnips are actually at the top of the screen, it's carrots straight in front of us. But you can't see those rows anymore. We only really need it at the early stages when the seedlings are just emerging. We plant a lot of varieties every year. This bed was 2 years ago and it's pumpkins. It might look like there's only a few plants there, and there are, but every pumpkin plant runs a long, long way. These pumpkins are from one of those plants only, so you can imagine how much room they need. Onions are a favourite crop, and you can see them in wonderfully regimented rows here. We also plant a lot of field beans, which are actually broad beans to a lot of people. And of course, my favourite, carrots too. And this is our vegetable growing area as it looks today. It's not the tidiest in the world, but then it's about food production. It's not about looking pristine. Over time, we've switched some of the beds away from vegetables, and now we have black currants in this bed. We have red currants in this bed, and we have lots of strawberries too. That's simply because what we found is we live in an agricultural area and vegetables are incredibly cheap to buy. It's useful to have some which we can pluck straight out of the ground for eating, but actually we want to invest instead in planting fruit, because we do eat a lot of fruit and it costs a fortune. So we grow and we preserve. Once the orchard was established and the vegetable plot was fully underway, we had realised that fruit was what we ate the most of, that was the most expensive. So we decided to undertake a major piece of construction, and that was to put in this giant fruit cage. So let's have a look at the build. The first thing we needed to do was decide where the fruit cage was going to go. In the previous scene, you would have noticed that the fruit cage isn't beside the border of the field. Originally it was, but that's because we had a very deep hedge line, which you would have seen us remove as part of the coverage of part 2, preparing the land. We marked it out with pegs to make sure that we had the right location at that time. It still wasn't right beside the hedge line, and that's because we needed to get a tractor down the side of the hedge to be able to flail cut it on a regular basis to keep that hedge in check. Just like the veg beds, we wanted to weed killer the grass inside the fruit cage to make sure that it didn't return. To make sure that we didn't make any mistakes on the outside of the fruit cage, this time we did take the turf off the border so it's clearly marked. Once that was done, we applied the weed killer, but unfortunately, almost immediately after the grass died, the snow came and the ground was frozen, very, very badly frozen. At the first sign of a thaw, we started digging out, but it meant it was incredibly muddy work, as you can see from the state of our gloves. It was so important to get that fruit cage up so we could use the short window of opportunity to get the canes in place for the raspberries and the blackberries before they started to wake up after the dormant season in winter. Just like the vegetable beds, using the manure from the cattle and sheep from our farming neighbour was really important for enriching the soil. Lots and lots of barrows were added, and those were once again rotivated into the ground. Lots of raking, rotivating, raking again, and soon the soil was looking fantastic. The next step was to put together the frame. We followed the instructions for the manufacturer and we put together the roof first. Laying this on the ground meant we could clearly mark exactly where the upright should be. We wanted to make sure that this fruit cage was completely solid. We chose to dig a hole for each of those uprights and set them into postcrete so they wouldn't move at all. Once that was done, we could put the roof on top. The fruit cage is 4 metres wide by 12 metres long, and we decided with a 4 metres width we could put 3 runs of raspberry and blackberry canes into the cage. Those runs needed to be supported by a structure, and we made that from uprights of wooden posts which are 4 by 4, and into those posts we've run wire all the way down. We managed to do all of this while the canes were dormant before they woke up after the dormant season. This photograph was taken a couple of months later when the canes were all alive and springing green leaves. At this stage we still hadn't added the netting to the fruit cage. There was no need. There were no blossoms and there were no fruit for any birds to steal, so we could take our time doing that. Of course, this is how the fruit cage looks today. It's a little bit untidy, and certainly untidier than it was when you saw the last picture, but it's incredibly productive, and it needs to be productive, not tidy. Those are our main growing areas, our orchard, our vegetable plot and our fruit cage. But we also decided we wanted to plant some additional perennials which come back year on year without having to be re-sown or very much maintenance done to them. The biggest perennial vegetable that we planted is rhubarb, and this is our most mature plant. We've actually got 15 rhubarb plants dotted around the place. We eat a lot of it, crumbles, pies, and actually we've got the most amazing rhubarb and strawberry leather that we make. The main fruit that we planted as a perennial are gooseberries, because again, have you ever tried to buy gooseberries in a shop? They are so expensive, but they're incredibly tasty too. So let's have a look at the development of those two. I'm going to start with the rhubarb because that's really straightforward and easy. There's no real development involved. All we needed to do was decide where we were going to plant it. We chose two locations. One is here at the gable end of one of the barns, and that plant has done tremendously well. And the second area is in a herb bed. You can see more of that in our video on extending our growing space. The gooseberries took a little bit more planning. We chose a little patch of the garden between the garden itself and the field, which was actually going to waste, but it needed a lot of preparation. We dug it out, and after a thorough weeding, this is what it looked like. It's got a wonderful aspect looking onto the neighbour's field. When we started planting, we only put a few gooseberry bushes in. Not a great deal, because the wonderful thing about gooseberries is that they spread fairly easily. You can layer the branches by pegging a branch down into the soil, and where it touches the soil, it'll start to form roots. So if you're patient, you can turn one plant into multiple plants. The gooseberries themselves took a little bit of time to establish, but because they're perennial, it's worth the wait, and soon they were forming small blossoms which very quickly turned into good-sized fruit. In this photograph you can see just how successful our layering technique has been, where we've turned a few gooseberry bushes into lots of gooseberry bushes. You can also see that we've netted the bed, and we did that for the first couple of years. But actually we found it really fiddly, a complete nightmare to pick fruit, and we decided not to bother going forward. We've lost only a few fruit to birds since then. Birds seem just as worried about the thorns as we are. Now we get lots of fruit. This is only one small bowl of the haul we get every single year. And that's it, that's the end of this renovation series. I'm sure there's things which we haven't covered that you're curious about. If that's the case, leave me a question in the comment section and I'll do my best to answer it. If you have enjoyed it, take a moment to give me a thumbs up below. If you're not already a subscriber, come and join us and hit the notifications icon. You'll get to know of any new videos as soon as we put them out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.